The Russian economy is rapidly slowing down. There are no new sources of revenue, inflation is through the roof, and entire sectors are collapsing one after another. At the same time, the budget is sinking deeper into debt dependency. Right now, the main goal of the Russian government is to at least try to slow down this decline somehow. But so far, it's not going very well. Let's talk about the crisis processes in the Russian economy and how this affects the Kremlin's ability to continue waging an aggressive war. In less than 2 months, starting January 1st, 2026, Russia will join the club of countries with the highest VAT rates in the world. The value-added tax is being raised from 20% to 22%. Moreover, under the new rules, companies with revenues starting from 10 million rubles will become VAT payers. Previously, this obligation applied to those with revenues starting from 60 million. According to many economic experts, this will be a serious blow to Russian businesses, especially small and medium-sized ones. Many companies, unable to withstand the additional tax burden, will go underground, start cutting staff, or even shut down completely.
Raising Russia's main tax and expanding the number of payers is an unscheduled measure. Moreover, Putin himself instructed that something like this should not be allowed back in 2024 during his election campaign. And later on, the possibility of raising taxes was firmly and repeatedly denied by the Ministry of Finance. Now, by constantly raising tax rates, the Kremlin admits that its growing appetite can't be satisfied by the natural growth of the economy. Putin's government is trying to grab an ever larger share of a pie that's shrinking. From a publication by The Insider.
According to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service, the total profit of Russian enterprises for the first 9 months of this year dropped by 8.3%. In the coal industry, losses have reached hundreds of billions of rubles, and already 2/3 of the plants are operating at a loss. Even the profits of the metallurgical giant Norilsk Nickel have dropped by almost 40% this year, while expenses have risen by 1/3 due to higher rates. The situation isn't any better for Gazprom. Over 9 months, the company's net loss amounted to 170 billion rubles. For the former main donor to the budget, this is not just a failure, but a sign that it now desperately needs government support.
Large enterprises, including those that are city-forming, as well as entire industries, are overloaded with debt, sending employees on unpaid leave and moving into the category of financially unstable, that is, they are on the verge of bankruptcy. The government cannot support them through tax breaks or budget subsidies, because this would mean a sharp increase in budget spending or a budget deficit, which would start to drive up inflation. From a Radio Liberty publication.
The Russian automotive industry is also experiencing a deep crisis. For example, the largest passenger car manufacturer, AvtoVAZ, has reduced its annual production plan from 500,000 to 300,000 vehicles. At the same time, the Tolyatti plant has switched to a 4-day work week. Kamaz's losses for 9 months have reached 29 billion rubles, which is 7 times more than the previous year. Experts note that without large-scale support, the industry risks losing most of its production capacity in the coming years. Import substitution, which the authorities were counting on, has failed to make up for the break with Western suppliers and technologies. And attempts to survive by relying on outdated models only highlight the scale of the industry's decline.
The Russian automotive industry, which experienced a near death after the departure of Western car manufacturers and then managed to restore production in 2023, is once again sinking. According to Rosstat statistics, from January to September, car production in Russia plummeted by 20%, returning to the lowest level seen in 2022. The decline of the automotive industry is accelerating every quarter. In January to March, it was 9.2%, in the second quarter 23%, and in the third, 26.7%. According to materials from the Moscow Times.
Because of the losses since the beginning of the year, hundreds of car dealerships have closed all over Russia. After all, almost 80% of cars there are sold on credit, and bank loans are becoming inaccessible for most citizens. As for the banking sector itself, the situation there is no less dire. Inflation is rising, and people see less and less reason to keep their money in accounts, even despite attractive interest rates. Outflow of deposits, increase in default, shortage of liquidity. In fact, the system is teetering on the brink of a large-scale crisis. Many experts suggest that the authorities might even restrict withdrawals for the public.
Like, on the one hand, that's pretty harsh, right? That's quite a move, yeah? But on the other hand, we remember how, when they had a crisis in March 2022, they actually did restrict foreign currency deposits, like withdrawals. Even though, like, it's our money, right? They just said, we're simply not going to give it out. Here's the limit and that's it. Yeah, and do whatever you want with that. So, this is a really interesting point, the disappearance of that gap between high deposit yields and inflation. So now, inflation is still high, but deposits aren't as profitable anymore, right? Basically, all of this is hanging on the edge of a cliff.
The Russian government hasn't claimed for a long time that sanctions aren't a big deal, but the word sanctions itself is still very much feared. That's why they came up with the phrase, geopolitical difficulties negatively impacting the economy, although numbers speak louder than any words or phrases here. According to Ukrainian intelligence, just from the end of cooperation between global companies and Rosneft and Lukoil, the aggressor country will lose at least $50 billion a year. U.S. sanctions have already led to the sharpest drop in Russian oil maritime exports since the beginning of 2024. According to Bloomberg, some Russian oil never reaches refineries and remains at sea, with Russians using tankers simply as temporary storage.
Oil refining companies in India, China, and Turkey, which together purchased about 95% of Russian crude, have suspended shipments while waiting for the situation to become clearer, or in some cases, have ordered batches of oil from smaller Russian companies that have not yet been included in the sanctions lists. Russian exporters continue to load oil onto tankers, but refineries are increasingly reluctant to accept it into their storage facilities. As a result, Russia simply had to leave some shipments at sea. From a Bloomberg agency publication.
Against this backdrop, Russia is becoming ever more deeply economically dependent on China. Large-scale projects in Siberia and the Far East are effectively turning these regions into a resource base for Beijing, while local communities are left without the promised investments and jobs. China receives preferences and long-term contracts, while Russia is left with the role of junior partner and supplier. In effect, Moscow is paying for Beijing's political support with raw materials, land, and infrastructure.
One of the key examples is the Zashalanskoye coal deposit in the Transbaikal region. Its development is being carried out jointly by Russian and Chinese companies. Mining is planned to last 100 years, and the Russian authorities have granted the company tax breaks. Starting in 2027, 5 million tons of coal are planned to be transported to China annually, which is about 500 trucks per day. Despite promises, local residents did not get the jobs. Key positions are held by Chinese specialists. From a report by the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service.
With the budget bursting at the seams, industry suffering record losses, and sanctions gradually taking their toll, the Kremlin will inevitably have to face the question not of how to keep fighting, but how to save its own economy. Ending the bloodshed is the only way to bring back at least some investment and stop the flight of capital. And the sooner the Russians themselves realize this, the more chances the country has to come out of isolation.